A thread by Rising Serpent. This is absolutely wild. Did you know that the most comprehensive, detailed, and well articulated expose of the dangers inherent in the widespread implementation of electronic voting systems came from a Democrat? And it happened a decade ago, way back in 2010. John C. Bonifaz is an attorney and political activist specializing in constitutional law and voting rights. He also ran for Secretary of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in 2006 as a Democrat, just so we can dispense with the right wing conspiracy theory things right now. On July 6th, 2010, he highlighted to the Technical Guidelines Development Committee and its UOCAVA working group what is, in essence, the exact same concerns that the Trump team, including Sidney Powell, Rudy Giuliani, and Lynn Wood, have repeatedly underscored over the past few weeks. If you didn't know that this was from 2010, you'd be convinced that this was a document written by the Trump team to make their case for election tampering, which makes the existence of this decade-old document absolutely astonishing. The juiciest excerpts follow. Quote, federal charges against voting systems company Diebold and its former chief executive officer Walden W. Odell during the years in which Diebold made voting systems and in which Odell wrote a letter in which he said he would deliver Ohio for then President George Bush. Quote, the swift rise this spring of Dominion, a little-known foreign company engaged in internet voting and with no reported income to become the first or second largest voting machine company in the United States after purchasing, in May 2010, the voting systems made by Diebold. Quote, Diebold formerly was the second largest voting systems company in the U.S. and no longer has a U.S. voting systems business. And after purchasing, in June 2010, Sequoia voting systems, the voting machines of which rely on proprietary source code developed and owned by Smartmatic, a company headquartered in Venezuela with ties to Hugo Chavez government of Venezuela. The movement of cybersecurity legislation to the U.S. Senate floor as cyber warfare from foreign nations and persons accelerate. Quote, a major challenge of internet voting and of any form of electronic voting is that there is no known way to confidently audit electronic voted ballots, including ballots generated by email, fax, or phone voting. End quote. Isn't this exactly what we're saying right now? While fraudulent transactions occur in commerce, we eventually detect them because commercial transactions create records that are checked by the people who are allegedly the originators of the transactions. Election theft is much harder to detect because there is only one transaction per person, and that person has no way to later audit his or her vote. If no reliable post-election audit or recount is conducted, then incorrect software or malicious code could result in the wrong candidate being declared the winner. End quote. I wasn't prepared for this one, but he actually invokes Robert Mueller. Yep, quote. In a March 2010 talk, FBI Director Robert Mueller is quoted as saying that the FBI's computer network had been penetrated and that the attackers had corrupted data, end quote. It gets wilder. Read on. Quote, the implication of Mueller's comments and the Google attack is that voting system software could be rigged by outsiders, including attackers from another country. The Google attack appears to have originated in China, end quote. He presciently spoke about China way back in 2010. Quote, elections are a fundamental component of our national security, and they must be treated as such. Introducing new voting methodologies into real elections demands rigorous risk assessment to ensure the most fundamental election property, integrity. Dominion, now the largest or second largest voting system company, is foreign controlled and depends upon secret source code created and owned by Smartmatic, a foreign controlled company with ties to the Venezuelan government led by Hugo Chavez. He said this 10 years ago. Quote, privately held Canadian voting system company Dominion, the past few weeks has purchased Diebold voting systems from ES&S and Sequoia voting systems. These purchases reportedly make Dominion the largest or second largest voting system company in the United States. Dominion is reported by Dun & Bradstreet to be a Toronto-based company with one listed key official, board members, and employee, John Poulos, and under $18 million in sales for which the company obtains no income. End quote. Again, he's describing this in 2010. Quote, before the Sequoia acquisition, Dominion had worked with Sequoia in New York State for over 3 years and had hired away one or more senior officials from Sequoia, including Edwin Smith, who now is a member of the Technical Guidelines Development Committee, end quote. Recall that Dominion most recently hired Nancy Pelosi's chief of staff, Needham El-Shami, as part of a lobbying team representing them. Past predicts future directionality. Quote, Dominion has acquired Sequoia's inventory and all intellectual property, including software, firmware, and hardware, but Sequoia could only sell Dominion that which it owns. When Smartmatic sold Sequoia to an investment group led by Sequoia's management team during an investigation by the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, CFIUS, into the identity of the person or persons who ultimately own Smartmatic and its ties to the Chavez government, Smartmatic apparently retained ownership of the software used in Sequoia voting systems to cast and count votes, licensing to Sequoia that software which Smartmatic develops in Venezuela. Efforts to date have not succeeded in determining the ultimate owners of Smartmatic or the extent to which Smartmatic and the Chavez government of Venezuela have influence over U.S. elections through Smartmatic's control of the software that counts votes for Sequoia, now Dominion, voting machines. Concern is that Smartmatic's sale of Sequoia was fraudulent, a sham transaction designed to fool regulators. Dominion apparently will employ Venezuelan-run Smartmatic's proprietary software in at least the Sequoia voting systems that it now owns. Dominion also is engaged in internet voting outside the United States and could employ Venezuelan-run Smartmatic's proprietary software. Appearing before the Election Assistance Commission earlier this year, a, quote, CIA cybersecurity expert suggested that Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez and his allies fixed a 2004 election recount. The expert, Steve Steigall, remarked that I follow the vote, and wherever the vote becomes an electron and touches a computer, that's an opportunity for a malicious actor potentially to make bad things happen. Steigall reportedly told the EAC that voting equipment connected to the internet could be hacked, and machines that weren't connected could be compromised wirelessly. Again, all that is from 10 years ago. Quote, for the reasons stated in Voter Action's April 26, 2010 comments to the EAC, and for the reasons stated in this letter and the exhibits referenced in these letters, the EAC Technical Guidelines Development Committee should recommend against EAC adoption. End quote. Reading this document, it appears plainly apparent to me that it wasn't that the dangers of electronic voting systems were underappreciated. In fact, it was quite the opposite. The right people knew back then what we know now. The only logical conclusion is that pandemic-provoked mass hysteria accomplished the dual goal of opportune timing for the implementation of an unauditable system while quashing any resistance to it by using the cudgel of social justice and voter disenfranchisement. There were no bugs, only features. And these were long known to have existed. I will be the greatest
created.